drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, October 10th, 2024, although I have to tell you that we are recording it Wednesday night, October 9th, at around 10 p.m. So we may get the days confused, as happens sometimes. And we are not a full house today, as is very uncommon. Abe Greenwald is not with us today, and Matt Continetti is out, which leaves you with me, John Podhoretz, and media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
So we're going to be vamping. We're having scheduling issues and problems of all sorts, and we will not, in fact, be having a podcast on Friday, as some of us have to prepare for the coming of the Yom Kippur Day of Atonement, which begins Friday night, but we're traveling and doing various things. And so this will be the last podcast of the week. And an unusual podcast is going to be, as we don't actually know, as I'm speaking, what we are going to be talking about. But of course, the thing that has amused many people over the course of the last several hours, if not 10 hours, was the decision, or split-second decision by Joe Biden in the course of a Zoom call with people involved in the disaster response world, including Kamala Harris, talk to the hand presidential candidate, which we'll talk about in a minute, that Joe Biden told the head of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, "You're doing a hell of a job." 19 years after, one I may recall, George W. Bush got into massive amounts of trouble for saying that the head of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, Michael Brown, was doing a heck of a job. At which point the roof fell in on George W. Bush, who apparently had done something colossally unforgivable in saying something nice about the head of FEMA. Evidently, we are not to have the same roof caving in on Joe Biden, even though he's done exactly the same thing.
Well, history repeats its farce. That's why. So
fair enough. There we go. First time is tragedy. Second time is farce. And it's farce, of course, because nobody believes that Joe Biden is actually president, though he does seem to be the president of revenge. Can we talk a little about revenge? Christine, what is going on between the president and Kamala Harris?
So this has been my weird pet theory for some time, with very little evidence to support it, except my own desire to see this drama play out in full. Every time she has an important public event, every time she has a statement to make or goes on a show, there have been, in recent weeks, a one-upsmanship going on from Biden. He pops up in a press conference. He suddenly is broadcasting or posting on social media from a cabinet meeting. Things, by the way, that he didn't really do before she was an active candidate getting all the attention. And at the same time, linking her, as we've discussed many times, to his administration, while she tries to make a strange pivot away. Although, again, in a kind of schizophrenic way, this past 24 hours, she's been saying she wouldn't change anything about the Biden administration and their record and her role in it. So it's a lot of mixed messaging, but it does seem very clear to me that he's very insistent that if it's a sinking ship for the Democrats in this election, she's going down with him.
This is very interesting. So, Seth, her saying, as she said on The View on Tuesday, that she couldn't think of a thing that she would have done differently, and kind of saying the same thing to Stephen Colbert later in the day, although the word salad was magnificent. I mean, it was like a Waldorf salad combined with a Caesar salad. It was something special. That might be her desperate effort to manage this problem. She is trying to do everything she can not to provoke him or insult him or offend him or get on his bad side, because he does seem to be in this weird position of trying to make some kind of news by counter programming against her.
Yeah, I mean, there was this Natasha Korecki of NBC News tweeted about 5:30 this afternoon. President Biden is asked whether DeSantis should take Kamala Harris's calls. Biden doesn't say yes, says that his conversations with DeSantis have been, quote, gracious. So he's taking opportunities to have people say, in other words, he knows how this is going to be reported. He knows that he could say something nice about her. He knows that he could turn it around or do some sort of political, jujitsu, but he doesn't. He's just honest, knowing how it's going to be reported. And of course, it is reported exactly that way. And it's basically interpreted as a suggestion that of the three people named in the tweet, only one of them is playing politics. And that person is not Ron DeSantis.
But see, I think he's actually trolling her occasionally, or someone on his staff. Maybe it's not him, but there was, I think I sent you guys on our text chain, right as she was, again, having one of her media blitzes today. You guys are listening to this a day later, but he posted from his official POTUS Twitter account, X account, Governor, and remember, her whole thing was this whole back and forth about the call. He posted this message: Governor DeSantis and Mayor Castor is the mayor of Tampa, if you need any additional resources as we prepare for Hurricane Milton to make landfall, you give me a call. We're here for you as long as it takes. I mean, I am sorry. That is clearly a trolling maneuver.
I mean, he's saying, I'm the president. Don't think I'm not the president. Right. Everybody in America thinks I'm not the president anymore because she's running for president, but I am the president. We only have one president at a time, and I am the president. And as we said on Thursday's podcast, I can't remember which one of the many of us said this, Jim Meggs or Christine or Seth, or I get, in a disaster. I think maybe Seth, it was you. In a disaster, there is a president and there is a governor, and those are the figures who deal with disasters. And the vice president is not a player in a disaster. And the way for Kamala Harris to become a player in a disaster, it's kind of a gruesome thing to talk about, right? Is, how do I get in on this catastrophic destruction and horror to redound to my political benefit? But the way to get into it is to be of help.
Right.
What that means is not entirely clear, except to say I stand at the ready to help in whatever way that I can. Maybe I can take time off from raising $1 billion in 3 months. Maybe I can raise some money to help people in Sarasota. I mean, literally, there was a story in the New York Times that says that Kamala Harris has raised $1 billion. No one has ever done this before, anything remotely like this before, anything remotely near this. She's still having fundraisers. Why is she having fundraisers? Maybe she should stop having fundraisers for her campaign, which doesn't need the money anymore, and do them do a telethon.
But fundraisers are where she's most comfortable. She's surrounded by like-minded people who will never challenge her, probably spend a lot of time flattering her. And the one thing she shouldn't do is allow Tim Walz off the leash on a fundraiser, because he's running around screaming about abolishing the Electoral College, and then the campaign officially has to walk that back. But I imagine, I have a friend who went to one of her fundraisers when she was a primary candidate before she flamed out. And she said, she just stands there smiling, and people come up to her, and she nods and she says a few nice words, but that don't amount to anything. And she's not actually treated like a candidate when she's at a fundraiser. So why wouldn't you prefer to do that rather than what she's subjecting herself to when she goes before voters or the media?
She also seems to want to have, like, when she first started to try to elbow her way into the hurricane stuff, it seemed like she was wishing for an Obama 2012 moment where he gets off the plane or the helicopter and is embraced by the governor and is seen to be doing stuff. Because she has modeled her campaign on Obama's campaign. She has, specifically. But you can't do that when you're vice president. So there's no helicopter taking her to the beach to meet with the governor or anything like that. So I think her initial instinct was to try to have that, but she can't. And also, she doesn't want to. She sort of half steps into these things, and then she remembers, oh wait, I don't like people. I don't like talking to people. I'm not good at it. Bad things happen when I get out into unscripted situations. And she sort of, steps back from it. She wants to be the type of politician who shows up in a crisis and you can just hand a shovel to, as we were laughing about this morning, how she clearly had never held a shovel before in her life, but she isn't that person.
Well, she's also acting as if she's a mid 20th century politician who's just can show up for the photo op and everybody will applaud and the photo op will be circulated among a few major newspapers and networks and then her job is done. But she lives in a social media age and she lives in an instant access to information age. And so what she did, little things, little glitches. Look, it's hilarious. I laughed. She was part of a live discussion about FEMA and what's happening in Update, and it's a sort of Zoom call, and there she is, and she has to put her hands over her face and say, "It's a live call" to her staff because they clearly haven't put her talking points in front of her, and so she's unprepared, and she's going to be caught unawares, being unable to actually play act at some sort of competence. And that moment, which is tiny, I mean, that happens to people in meetings. We could be forgiving of it, but it's so indicative of everything that's wrong with her campaign. And so much like reminds me of those movie sets where they have the huge house built and then you walk around behind it and it's just propped up by two boards because it's a set. So many of her campaign moments are set pieces, but we can immediately see behind it. And
Right.
that's just what's so disconcerting about it.
Well, what this brings to mind is this bit that Chevy Chase did in the first season of Saturday Night Live, now recalled in this not very good movie about Saturday Night Live called Saturday Night, where he's the anchorman of Weekend Update. And, Don Pardo says, "Weekend Update with Chevy Chase." And he's on the phone talking to his girlfriend. He's like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I'll be home. I'm really looking for. And then he looks up and he realizes the camera's on him and he goes, "Good evening, I'm Chevy Chase." Like, she was talking on the call. Millions of people were watching this. It was a public event set up to be a demonstration to the American people that the disaster response of the Biden administration was going gangbusters, and she's having a private conversation behind her hand. She's really not good at this. Like, that's what's so interesting about this. We knew she wasn't good at it because of 2019, right? I mean, she was the one candidate in the race aside from Biden who had a moment, who had this kind of explosive moment where she sort of said, I was
that girl, John. Oh, sorry. No.
Yes, I was that girl, right. I was that girl on the bus that was bust.
Take my chance there.
But she had this one moment where she kind of popped. And then not only couldn't she raised a huge amount of money off it. Not only couldn't she really take advantage of it, but of course, the contrast of the rest of the campaign to that moment was what brought her so low, so that by the time December rolled around, she had to drop out of the race before a single vote was cast, and she would have been not only humiliated, but basically the rest of her political career would have been that would have been the end of the rest of her national ambitions as a political figure. And, she's had 5 years to get better. And granted, she's now being watched in a way that no one has been, and has been sort of like thrown into this fiery furnace. But her instincts are bad, and it's uncomfortable to watch her. Like, every time you watch her, you get kind of weirdly nervous.
But see,
for what she's going to do.
But see, this is why she's fortunate, because like CBS, the Democratic Party now has an in-house race and culture unit. And so she was able to just, all of her incompetence aside, she was slotted into the role of vice president, thanks to that statement that Biden made that it had to be a Black woman.
She's also benefiting from the fact that from the fact that she didn't have to go through a primary in a way that's hurting her in the same, in the double-edged sword of not having to go through the primary, right? She couldn't sharpen herself, but now we know that she's incapable of sharpening herself. A primary would not have fixed this. She wouldn't be smooth now if she had to go through a primary to get here. She wouldn't be here. So, that
right.
part
Fair
of it.
enough. Okay. So we're talking about her performance, and part of the reason that we're talking about her performance is that she's not running on policy, right? I mean, she's announces bits and pieces of policies, and she, loves our middle class, and she had a second mother, and
she did the fries. Yeah.
She's going to give you $25,000 for your house, and she's going to somehow Medicare is going to pay for you to take care of your mother, your aged parent in your house in a fashion that will not completely bankrupt the United States of America in, 18 months or something like that. But so mostly she's not running on policy. So all we have to go by is performance. We're not sitting here talking about how the Kamala Harris policies are going to be X, Y, and Z, and op-eds are talking about that, and then there's a kind of policy debate over how this might be different from that. And all we have is her flat on your screen or not flat on your screen, and how she talks and what she says and how she comes across. So if she does this thing on this Zoom call where she talks into her hand to however she is communicating with her people, I guess maybe through some kind of a headphone system, or she's got a mouthpiece that they're whatever. We're going to talk about that because we got nothing else.
So first of all, she should have learned Morse code, so then she could have done this entirely surreptitiously. But I think this suggests that maybe we were wrong to say that strategically she couldn't have continued the Vibes campaign, or should have. Maybe she should have, coming out of the convention. Remember, she totally leaned into that. She leaned into not having specifics about policy. She leaned into image making, little short videos, her hugging constituents and whatnot. Maybe they should have actually just tried to ride that horse all the way to the end. We would have been cynical and bashing her for it, but honestly, it would be better than this. This is so confusing to people.
But
even
if
to
you're
people
going
who
to
like
bring
her.
the joy, if you're bringing the joy, you've got to do something that is a simulacrum of joy.
Right. Which she was doing with her image
do anything.
Stuff. Well, she's
right,
doing,
but I mean,
yeah.
Okay, so she was doing that, but then she kind of ran out of joy.
I think they thought she didn't look like she had enough gravitas, to be honest, because that was all like happy balloons, convention, mandatory joy. Coming out of that, then she had to show, I can lead this country. And even her tone of voice changed. She's been playing around with different accents, but all of it suggests, I think you're right, John, that it's the no there problem. We don't really still know who she is. And as Seth suggested...
No, I fear we know who she is. That's, I think...
she's the void. I still go back to this. She's the void.
She is...
she is the void.
She is Chance the Gardener mixed with Selena Meyer. And so she, half the time it's being there, and you got to see being there to know, or read Jerzy Kaczynski's novel to know what I'm talking about. And then half the time she's Selena Meyer. So when she is being ingenuous, she's Chance the Gardener, and when she is being attempting to master the art of being a political leader, she sounds like a parody of a political leader by saying things like, this is how in the Middle East we manage to try to affirm the sense that our efforts are going where it is necessary that they go to fulfill the needs of which we are desirous, which is kind of some version of what she said to Stephen Colbert. I mean, she said something else that's not a direct quote, but it might as well have been what I just said, because she said nothing different. It was maybe a different kind of Mad Libs collection of words, but it had no greater or lesser meaning than what I just said. Now let's talk about we moved on to CBS. And the very interesting thing that is going on, this is now a multi-day story that is accelerating rather than slowing down, and in a very interesting way, because story we're talking about is, of course, that Tony Dokapil, one of the anchors of the CBS morning show, interviewed Ta-Nehisi Coates last week about his book, The Message, and grilled him about some of his opinions relating to Israel, and the fact that he didn't mention Hamas, he didn't mention October 7th, he didn't mention anything about the terrorism afflicting Israel. He only talked about Israel as though it were a Jim Crow state that had no right to exist, and was then subjected all of a sudden to the declaration by the head of the news division that this interview did not meet CBS's editorial standards.
Well, although that is shifted slightly, because
Yes.
now it's that because CBS does have this in-house race and culture unit, and they vet guests that might trigger all of their obviously easily triggerable that's not a word, easily triggered employees. There was a script. There's sort of a one sheet that they do for potentially provocative guests, and so they've done a one sheet, and Tony just didn't follow the script. He went a little off script, not that far off script, actually. He just did his job again as a journalist, but he asked him a couple pointed questions that hadn't been previously vetted and approved on the one sheet, and now that's why he was made. And again, this is Maoist in its structure, and its enforcement, and its ritualized humiliation. He's now had to go before the unit and admit his error and show tears.
However, the owner of CBS, Shari Redstone, came out and said he did a great job and called him and praised him. And now the people who run the news division at CBS, Woman McMahon, who apparently was the person who had made the decision to announce the editorial standards violation, has been undercut by the person who pays her salary and could fire her in a heartbeat, thus leading one of the co-heads of CBS, George Cheeks, to issue a statement as clear in its rhetoric and meaning as a Kamala Harris statement about what her views are on Israel and Bibi Netanyahu. So we're now 5 days into this story. Very interesting detail. So Dylan Byers of Puck points out, just says, Tony Dokapil is Jewish and has children who live in Israel, which is true. Tony Dokapil is a convert to Judaism, converted when he married his first wife, and they had children together, and she lives in Israel with their children. And Dylan Byers says Tony Dokapil should have revealed this. It might have been the proper thing for him to do, to explain that he somehow had a conflict of interest in asking Ta-Nehisi Coates a question about Ta-Nehisi Coates' anti-Zionist book by saying, I am Jewish, so you can discard and discount what it is that I am saying. And our friend David Bernstein of George Mason, who is somebody who deals with anti-Semitism issues, says, if he was brought up in personnel actions relating to these matters with the implicit understanding that he had somehow violated rules or broken form because of his religion, CBS is guilty of a significant violation of the law, of employment law, because, you can't just say you can't ask a woman if she's pregnant, or you can't, say something about somebody if they're black. If you say somebody shouldn't be allowed to cover X, Y, or Z because they're Jewish, or they need to reveal that they're Jewish in order to talk about something relating to matters that are Jewish.
Well, they can demand that everybody disclose their faith, everybody disclose all of these things to anyone they ever interview. It's the fact that they only told him he had to do that. And
Well, no
because
one
he's
told him.
Jewish, well,
No
no
one-
one told
no-
him.
no
But
one
the
told
assumption
him.
is that, right, the complaint is that he didn't disclose it. But do we know that whatever the religious faith of any other host on CBS News, paganism in most cases, I
No,
imagine.
but again, the thing was that this idea now is that you can't say, you've written a book called The Message. You say Israel shouldn't exist. In that book, you don't talk about Hamas or October 7th. Is that fair? And that line of questioning requires that you reveal that you are an interested party
Right.
because you have Jewish children or that you are yourself Jewish.
Well, right. So could
That
a Catholic
yes.
correspondent have to do the same when she's interviewing someone about abortion?
Well, obviously that
This
answer.
is-
Yeah.
Of course, the answer is
This
no.
has a very interesting echo in recent American media history, which is what happened with Ethan Bronner at the New York Times. Ethan was the New York Times bureau chief for years in Jerusalem, and he has children, and his son, when he got old enough, joined the IDF. And so it created an outcry. Electronic Intifada and all these anti-Israel sites sort of went nuts on the New York Times saying that Ethan Bronner should not be able to cover the conflict anymore because his son serves in the IDF. Ethan Bronner is covering wars in Gaza while his son now fights for the army, that is, although his son wasn't sent into Gaza. So, and they had a whole fight over this, and the public editor of the Times actually took the side of the critics at the time. And Clark Hoyt said that this is how he sums up the end of his column. I have enormous respect for Bronner and his work, and he has done nothing wrong. But this is not about punishment. It is simply a difficult reality. I would find a plum assignment for him somewhere else, at least for the duration of his son's service in the IDF. So the public editor of the New York Times is saying, the New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem can't be the New York Times Jerusalem bureau chief as long as his son is in uniform for the IDF. And so you have these situations where what you have to disclose, it's much more complicated. And Tony Dokapil is being held to a standard also that it's unclear exactly what the standard is. There isn't a rule
But they
book that
know
says
they did not. Right.
Yeah.
They did not say what I just said. Dylan Byers said it, and it's the implicit understanding of the racial justice unit at CBS that because Tony Dokapil did this interview in the way that he did it, the problem, according to them, was not that the questions he asked were not appropriate, but his tone. His tone.
Mm-hmm.
There was something wrong with his tone. Apparently he had a Jewish tone. There was something Jewy about his tone. He didn't have a properly respectful tone.
For whatever reason, he suddenly sounded like Bernie Sanders. I don't know where it came from.
I don't know what
Brooklyn
it means
accent.
that he didn't have the right tone, but that is the allegation. And then the other allegation is that he placed correspondents of CBS News reporting in foreign climes in danger by interviewing Ta-Nehisi Coates in a way that required him to answer questions about the underlying theme of his book. So I guess if you're a CBS News correspondent in Tajikistan, you're now in danger because Tony Dokapil asked Ta-Nehisi Coates a question that people at CBS News didn't like because he wasn't cheerleading for the book. So this is all disingenuous, right?
One more data point as well that
Okay.
we learned from reporting it by Ali Wiseman at the Free Press today. You can't use the word Jerusalem at CBS anymore when you're talking about what's happening in Gaza or in
But you can't use Israel and
right,
Jerusalem.
But when they actually sent an email, the senior director of standards and practices sent an email to all news employees reminding them to, quote, be careful with some terms when we talk or write about the news from Israel and Gaza. One of the words on the list was Jerusalem. Do not refer to it as being in Israel.
Okay, so and Sherry Redstone owns CBS, is the head chairman of Viacom, is selling it, but currently owns it. Selling it, by the way, to David Ellison, son of Larry Ellison, Jewish guy, Sherry Redstone, Jewish woman, both Zionists. So let's see what happens here. This is not over yet.
No, it's not. And what I took from Ollie Wiseman's reporting and the Free Press's excellent reporting over the past couple of days, I don't know what was there with like 5 stories in 48 hours, is that there are lots of people at CBS who are really unhappy about the way they treated Tony. Some have gone on the, I mean, we know Jan Crawford is happy to say in public, you know, what to defend Tony, and some others have defended Tony, at least in terms of, you know, his journalistic ethics or whatever exactly is under fire. But it's very clear that there's leaking going on from inside CBS as well, and they're sending the Free Press, you know, transcripts and forwarding emails and sending them audio recordings. It seems like there is a real battle there now, where the push against Tony went so far and was so ridiculous that that it is indeed far from over, because they don't have the situation that the New York Times had with Barry Weiss, where it was like, there's everybody on one side and then there's Barry on the other. And so, you know, banish Barry or whatever. This at CBS right now, it seems like there's a real fight over this.
Listen, Barry lost the confidence of the publisher of the paper. Adam Rubenstein was fired because A.G. Sulzberger said, get rid of that guy, and fired James Bennett, the boss, because he had published the offending Tom Cotton op-ed. Sherry Redstone is the owner of CBS and has said Tony Dokapil did an excellent job with this interview. It is the CBS News Division's executives who got out over their skis, sucking up to their own DEI people because they're scared shitless of them. And they're scared, they're worried about getting trashed in the press by that Maoist mob, and did not realize that they were starting to get themselves lost in a thicket with their own employers. Christine, you're muted.
Okay, so that's one plausible scenario, but let me suggest another. It's a little more depressing, because we did for a while like to think, when some of the cancellations stopped or let up, and when we were all asking, oh, we've reached peak woke, people are finally calming down, they realize the excesses. I would posit that it's not that they're doing all this because they're scared of the mob. It's that they are part of the bureaucratic administration of this. They believe it, and what's ended is that the people who might have been canceled are largely gone. The Dokapil story is interesting because they probably didn't expect him to do this, and it was sort of, oh, there's one we forgot to get out earlier. I mean, there's a sense in which the woke stuff is so bureaucratized now in so many of these places, and at the level of management, that it becomes a story when someone like Tony still steps up and does something mild, and then he instantly was brought into the system, made to apologize. So I don't know that it's that they're scared but don't really believe it or just playing along at this point. I think a lot of the people at the management level believe it too. I mean, they've embraced it. It is the new normal in those environments.
That's totally fair. That is a totally fair analysis.
So depressing, but it might be.
But I'm not sure that it's right in this sense, which is that the McMahon, who runs CBS, was a marketing executive at ABC. She was an ad salesman and a marketing person, and somehow, through the alchemy of this collapse of the news business and the network news business and the television and ratings and the profitability of these news divisions and the musical chairs that has gone on, she has ended up in this position. There was a moment of controversy, and she defaulted to the what you do in the moment of controversy handbook that was written in June and July of 2020. What do you do when there is a racial controversy? You start a struggle session and you try to isolate and target the person who is making the trouble, and see if you can get that person to make to show contrition, to apologize for his mistakes, and then everybody gets a nice brainwashing session with a DEI counselor, and there's an all hands on deck meeting where everybody vows to do better, and then you desperately try to keep your job by doing all this, because your job is no safer than anybody else's if you were in senior management. And so that's why I say it's not over yet, because God only knows what's going to happen. Shari Redstone is selling that company, but on the way out the door, she could fire them all. She still runs it until I guess there's some kind of administrative or regulatory approval of the sale of CBS, because it has a news division and because of because of various rules regarding ownership of networks and things like that, and the special privileges that you get if you own networks. Something is subject to FCC approvals or things like that. She could just fire 15, 20 people. Just say, okay, you're all gone. I don't care. I'm leaving. What are you gonna do? Trash my reputation? Look, Shari Redstone was a guest at the Barry Weiss roast of at commentary. We had a commentary in a couple of years ago. So, she was there, and she's a Zionist, and a happy Zionist. And like I say, so as I understand it, is Larry Ellison, who basically is buying it from her in the name of his son, David. So who knows?
Tony is unlikely to have a feisty interview such as that in the future, and who would blame him, but also others at the company are. Like these sorts of,
Yes.
of like mini hysterical freakouts tend to scare everybody into just shutting up for a while, but also nobody wants the controversy to be around them. So in the end, they'll find that he didn't do anything unethical, because obviously he didn't do anything unethical.
Right. Well, the issue is not him.
To wait for him. They just want to make an example. Nobody talked to Ta-Nehisi this way, okay? And that point got across, whether Shari Redstone supports Tony specifically in this instance or not.
Right. Well, the person to watch, the reputation, the career, and the person to watch here is not Tony Dokapil. It is Jan Crawford. And Jan Crawford is a person of heterodox opinion within CBS News, and has been for 15 years. She is the Supreme Court, largely has covered the Supreme Court, got into some trouble because she covered, when she was covering the Obamacare decisions, or when the Supreme Court was hearing the Obamacare case and various other things, she was one of the people who said that the Obama administration had handled the oral arguments poorly, and that had not made a good showing of themselves as opposed to the plaintiffs or whoever was on the other side. And there was, again, sort of like internally, there was a freak out at CBS News that she could even say such a terrible thing. I mean, it's just beyond all.
This is a reporter,
belief.
by the way, who is actively and professionally cultivated sources throughout the legal system, and she's a very good journalist. I mean, she actually has sources at the highest court in the land for reason, which is
at that Obamacare thing. She was the one who broke the behind the scenes story of Kennedy and Roberts, and the effort to try to convince Roberts to stick with the conservative position and blow the whole thing up because of the individual mandate and all the other stuff. And what happened when Roberts sort of wanted to make a concession to the other side to get more people to get a larger majority, and therefore sort of narrow the definition. She was the one who wrote the decision. She was the one who wrote that whole piece about what went down.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is she's the one to watch. She is the one who stood up and said, "What you people are doing is disgusting." She said, he did everything fine. He did nothing wrong. I don't know what you're talking about." And of course, the point here is that this division, this sort of racial sensitivity division, they're not journalists. They're not reporters. They're not. They didn't.
They're cut rate
work.
HR.
Yeah, they didn't
Well,
work
it
on
is.
the Springfield, Illinois Dispatch and then, write obits and cover City Hall and then go to the Indianapolis Star and then go here and go there and go the other place. They're professional HR communicate bureaucrats who know absolutely nothing except how to use doctrine to punish and silence and terrorize people. And that's why you got to watch her, got to watch what's going to happen to Dokapil. But it is true that this is all about pour encourager les autres, as you said, Seth. It's like a way of putting people on notice again. If you step out of line, you're going to get this treatment. But, we're in a slightly different world. So what did Barry demonstrate? Barry demonstrated that you walk out and you start a Substack with some, brilliance and foresight and a sense of, cleverness about how you're going to go about it. And you start creating you can start creating a rival institution to the one that you left. Way smaller, way more focused, and not the equal of the New York Times. But you are no longer put out, you're no longer exiled to Elba. And should something like that happen to Jan Crawford, she's not going to be exiled to Elba. For one thing, she can go work at the Free Press.
I was going to say the Free Press will have a new legal correspondent, hopefully.
But it doesn't have to be the Free Press. She can go out on her own. She can go to Substack on her own.
Yeah, well, there was this whole trend during the woke stuff where you would talk to people who were not conservatives and they would say, well, to freelance writers, and they would talk about how much they enjoy writing for conservative publications because they could write what they think. And after a while, this sort of non-woke left of center folks were finding themselves only writing at more conservative leaning outlets because that was the only place but they weren't conservatives. And so there was this whole, it's the non-woke stuff was not just for conservatives or right wingers. There was this whole, swath of writers and journalists who really did not enjoy the walls closing in the way they were.
It spawned a kind of fun and petty game among conservatives of who will be red pilled. Will this person go all the way? Will they finally join us? I mean, many don't, yes. but it's true that it was fun to watch.
It's one of those moments where you're torn if you're people like us between saying, look, absolutely, come speak your mind, be with us, you can have the opinions you have. We believe in free speech. We believe in open expression and disagreement and all that. And then also like, the hell with you. Like, what did you ever do when other people were getting it were getting kicked in the shins and getting shivved? Right. Did you stand up for them or did you stand on the sidelines and wait until it happened to you?
Yeah.
Look, it took James Bennett 3 years to write the piece that he wrote in the Economist about what happened to him. It took Donald McNeil, 3 years to write the piece about his shivving. It is a very difficult experience, because these are people who are, in Yuval Levin's terms, who are people who grew up inside these institutions and believed in these institutions as institutions, and then discovered that these institutions had gotten so corrupted that the faith that they had placed in them was being used to destroy them, rather than they were like, I'm playing by the rules. I'm doing what you told me to do and the way I'm supposed to do it. And you just sacrificed me on the altar of a new religion. And I don't even know how to think outside these terms.
Well, and added to that at a more everyday level, and this was very true for academics who've been canceled. If you talk to any of them, they will tell you this. Their social world is also often very connected to that institution, whether it's academia or media. And people joke about, oh, you won't be invited to the right cocktail parties. But that's really quite flippant when you think about particularly in academia, where everybody does socialize and you're in the same space walking down the hall next to these people who've turned on you. It's a very personal violation of community membership too, in a way that I think is very difficult for people to get over even years later.
Well, look, there is it is a form of excommunication.
Right.
So harem, which is what it's called in Hebrew, excommunication. There are many different forms of excommunication, but what it originally meant wasn't that you were, killed or, whatever. But literally in Jewish terms, it was that you lived in a group of people who were in a bunch of tents living together in some place with a bunch of tents and, had central, and you cooked together and you did this and you did that. And then it was like, sorry, you're not in our, you can't live here anymore. Got to go over there. Like wherever you go, you can go 5 feet away from us, but you got to be over there by yourself. We're not going to talk to you. We're not going to trade with you. We're not going to have anything to do with you. And it's a kind of death. I mean, it's a kind of social death. You can't sit with us
in Mean Girls parlance. Yeah, you can't sit with us.
But I mean, you can't sit with us forever.
Social death is hard enough as it is, but in the post-COVID age where everybody's lives are that much more online, where people are working remotely more often than they used to, or completely, in some cases, then you really have no lifeline. Then it's not about Georgetown cocktail. The Georgetown cocktail party things was always funny, but it's not about cocktail parties. The joke is just, you're sitting at home and your communication with your peers and your peer group is mostly on the internet, and the internet hates you. So what do that can be a suffocating experience, and it also is a socially like discombobulating experience. It can sort of set you off your off balance, and who else thinks this way? Who agrees with this person? I don't know. I'm not in an office anymore, so I'm not around all these people to have sneaky whispering side conversations with, to see who's on my side and who's sending me a note and whatever. You're just sort of like, gee, I wonder if it's everybody who hates me. It's only half the people who hate. When will they stop? There's no lifting of the cherem, right, in this sort of situation. So the physical disconnection can make it a lot harder.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And even worse are these people who did not grow up, have not spent their professional careers either enjoying or dealing with or developing a thick skin toward expressing opinions that are not entirely conventional in the worlds in which they travel. People like us have done that throughout our careers. We live in certain communities that we hold minority views in, and you learn that people are going to be, like mad at you or aren't going to talk to you or going to talk behind your back or something like that. You get a little paranoid, you get this, you get that, you develop calluses. Sometimes you really enjoy being the provocateur. But if you are a certain type of person, most people don't want to be provocative. That's not their goal. What they want to be is liked. They want to be loved. They want to be admired and respected and considered an outstanding, an upstanding member of the community. And when the rules change on them, like, what's really good is being somebody on a news show who asks really tough questions of a best-selling author, because that's something people go, yeah, that was a really good interview. That was really, you really forced him to talk about what he was really saying. And, it was respectful, but it was serious. And that was a serious exchange. I assume that's what Tony Dokapil thought he was doing with Ta-Nehisi Coates. It wasn't the idea that he was walking into the lion's den, or that he was about to have boulders start dropping down on his head. This is what he thought you were supposed to do in order to be the sort of person who gets a job as a co-host of a morning show on network television, of whom there are 8 at any given moment on the planet Earth. on CBS, NBC, and ABC. He, Gayle King, and whoever the other guy is, I don't even know his name. There are three of them. They've been hosting this show for 2 years. And, it's like he got there and he got the job, and this is what you're supposed to do when you have that job. Except, no, you're not. But they don't tell you when the rules change.
Didn't seem to think Coates didn't complain publicly afterwards either. So I think Tony was really blindsided by it, in part because of that, because there wasn't a blow up on the show, right?
Right.
And Coates stood up, thrown down his lav mic, and walked off the set. We would all understand immediately there was a controversy here and there will be repercussions. But they smiled at each other, said thank you, and walked away. Neither one of them talked about it or said anything.
Didn't Coates go on a podcast though?
Recently,
then later
he was asked. Finally, after it became a whole scandal, he was asked.
Yeah, he was asked after.
The scandal's about you. What do you think? Hey, nobody asked you what you think, and I thought that was so telling, because it was like, oh yeah, nobody has asked. We haven't heard from Ta-Nehisi yet.
No, and then
in his honor.
And what did he reveal in that interview? He revealed that Gayle King, Tony Dokabille's co-host, had shared with him the questions that she would have asked him had she been allowed to be the questioner. And he thought she was going to be the questioner, and then it wasn't her. We don't know what happened there exactly, but she shared the questions with him beforehand, which is, dare I say it, a violation of editorial standards of any respectable news organization. You do not feed questions in advance unless your name is Candy Crowley and you work for CNN and the debate is between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, in which case you conspire with Barack Obama to do a gotcha moment against Mitt Romney. And that did happen, and she was never punished for it, and we still aren't at the bottom of that. You know what happened. I know what happened. Everybody who watched it know what happened. That Obama had supplied her with a piece of paper she was supposed to read out if Romney said this very specific thing about how Obama had responded to Benghazi. So we have violations of these standards all the time. They happen all the time. They just haven't happened in this direction, right?
The direction of journalism. Like, in other words, the violations that happen that go unpunished are actual violations. The quote unquote violations that do get punished are you asked the tough question that you didn't share with him beforehand.
It's upside down world.
Yes. Well, I mean, it would be hard for people like us to have more contempt for an organization like CBS News, which of course retailed the George W. Bush fake story about the National Guard and the letter written in the New Times Roman font that didn't exist in 1972 when it was supposed to have been written. That was 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago this month or last month that Dan Rather and CBS 60 Minutes did the story on George W. Bush's supposed fake National Guard service using a fraudulent and contemporaneous piece of investigative, a memo. So it would be hard for me to have more contempt for CBS News. Obviously, it's a different place. It's just shares the same name. Everybody who was there before is mostly not there now. But this, I think, this certainly wasn't that egregious violation of every possible standard and effort to interfere with and overturn, and destroy a presidency and win the White House for the Democrat. That's a whole other thing. But it's pretty bad. I mean, I've been in this business myself more than 40 years, and this is pretty bad. It's pretty seriously bad. Okay, so I guess we're gonna bring this to a close. This short and small and more intimate.
At least you didn't call it the Dregs podcast.
Well, it's not the Dregs because no one's drinking.
I know, it's true.
No one is drinking, but anyway, so yes, so this is the last podcast of the week. May you, if you are fasting Friday night through Saturday, may you have an easy fast, and may you be inscribed in the Book of Life for a good year. For Christine and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.